So let me begin once again by welcoming you. My name is Leah Wing, and I'm the director of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution. Despite its name, we are an international organization, and we have 50 fellows from around the world, from 25 countries, and we are blessed to have today as our conversation webinar the founder of the field of online dispute resolution, visionary Ethan Katsh, and another visionary who we're blessed to have as a fellow of the center, Richard Susskind. And I'm going to do a little bit more of a formal introduction and then hand it over to them. Professor Richard Susskind, OBE, is president for the Society of Computers and Law, chair of the advisory board of the Oxford Internet Institute, technological advisor to the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales. As I said, we're so fortunate. He's a fellow of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution, and he's the world's most cited author on the future of legal services. So we're lucky today that he's going to speak specifically about that and more broadly. He's a prolific author. His 15 books have been, his books have been translated into 15 languages, and he has been invited to speak in over 50 countries. So we know he's incredibly busy, and we're really fortunate to have him today speak about his updated version of the future of the professions, how technology will transform the work of human experts, that he co-authored with his son, Daniel Susskind. And our beloved Ethan Katsh, founder of the field of ODR, who established this center, is Professor Emeritus of Legal Studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in the US, recipient of the Lamberté Raven Award by the American Bar Association, very distinguished award, also a prolific author. And these are just a few of his many books, and we're excited to hear their conversation. I welcome all of you to put your comments, your questions in the chat as we go. And when Ethan and Richard are willing to take a short break, they will be jumping in to answer your questions and welcome your comments. But feel free as we go along to put your questions and comments in the chat. And with that, I turn it over to Ethan and Richard.
Morning, Richard, or I guess good afternoon, Richard. It's always an honor to talk to you. We started doing this many years ago in person, and this is a continuation of that. Originally, I think our conversations focused on law, legal services, legal institutions. So you've branched out. I'm not sure I have branched out. Anyway, I'm totally impressed that you wrote this book with your son. I hope you're still on speaking terms with him. But that alone is a real achievement. And perhaps you can see behind me, perhaps not. I've got your book prominently displayed, your last book on online courts prominently displayed. Anyway, I thought we would begin with trying to understand essentially what the book is about, which is about the professions and change in one direction or another of these professions. So do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. Ethan, this is a great pleasure. Leah, thanks for your introductory comments. Actually, the honor is mine to be here. I greatly value my fellowship of the National Center, and I find its work and the work of colleagues so incredibly helpful. Ethan, I should just go on record as saying there's no person's body of work in this field I admire more. He has for decades been contributing, and I've always found his work inspiring. So this is for me a great honor. You rightly say, and I probably do deserve a medal, as does Daniel, for a father and son collaborating and writing. That's the most common question asked. Daniel often makes the joke that I've become like a father to him, which we think is very funny. But we came together, although we had known each other previously. We came together in 2012. He was working at the time for the then far more respectable Prime Minister of England or of the United Kingdom. And he was working then on health policy and education policy, on justice policy and technology policy. And I was doing my thing, advising governments and advising law firms and other professional firms. And we felt that there's something quite fundamental going on. Certainly trends that Ethan, you and I had been tracking for decades in law, we saw were playing out across the professions. And for a variety of reasons, we thought it might be quite interesting to do a detailed study across the professions, basically of the impact of technology and in particular of artificial intelligence on the way that professional work is undertaken. And you'll recall, Ethan, that in the early 80s, I wrote my doctorate at Oxford on AI and law. So this was bringing together a lifelong love of my son with my lifelong love of artificial intelligence and seeing how we could apply it to professional services. What was quite interesting, we thought, though, early on, was that we were both attracted by a deeper question, which is, why do we have the professions at all? What basic problem do they exist to solve? And we believe that, or we argue that the professions are a relatively new phenomenon. Not that doctors and lawyers are a new phenomenon, but organized as they are today as profession, relatively new phenomenon. And the interesting thing is that we give these occupational groups essentially exclusive rights over certain key areas of our lives. So we only allow surgeons to cut us open. We only allow certain kinds of lawyers to appear in upper courts on our behalf. We only allow certain kinds of accountants to certify that financial accounts are accurate and so forth. We thought it would be quite interesting just to inquire into this in more detail. And it's quite simple in a way that human beings have limited understanding. And when we're beyond our range of knowledge and experience in problems that really matter to us, our health, our wealth, our legal status and so forth, we turn to experts. And these experts, as I say, have this exclusivity under what Dan and I call the grand bargain. This is the bargain that gives them exclusivity, in return for which they're meant to make their services available, they're meant to keep them up to date, they're meant to make them affordable and so forth. And the solution of the print-based industrial society to the problem of us as human beings having limited knowledge is to interpose the professions in between us as human beings and these bodies of knowledge, and they interpret and guide us. And the difficulty we really identified quite early on was that our professions are creaking, whether it be our health service, our educational service, our legal services. There's a wide level, even in advanced economies around the world, in the quality of services. Not only that, they're unaffordable for many or most people. They're often regarded as antiquated. They're opaque or unintelligible often, unless you're a specialist. And they underperform, we said, in the sense that the scarce expertise of leading specialists is made available only to a relatively few people around the world. So the question we were asking in a digital society is that might there be different ways of making what we call practical expertise more widely available and more easily accessible? Practical expertise being our term, sorry, I know there's a long answer, but it's just the preamble. Practical expertise being our term for the knowledge, not just in textbooks, but also the practical everyday experience, the know-how, the heuristics, the insights that the best experts bring to bear. Might there be another way of producing and distributing practical expertise in society? And of course, we argue that in an AI-based digital society, we are seeing the emergence of a platform and a set of enabling technologies to help people, for example, understand and sort out some of their health problems, to educate themselves better, to understand and enforce their entitlements, and so forth. And so finally, in this, as I say, very long run-up, we recognize that traditional professionals are gatekeepers, and we ask the question, to what extent are they benevolent custodians or jealous guards? And we worry a little bit that we have had professions that, through self-regulation, essentially discourage others from participating in the delivery of solutions and services in their areas. And we worry about that. So our book was basically, after a long introduction of why we have the professions, we then looked at technology, we then looked at the knowledge base of economy, we looked at the economic, the technological drivers of change. And we believe it's an optimistic book at the end, but that's enough perhaps by way of preamble.
Well, thank you. My understanding, limited understanding of professions was that originally there were four: law, medicine, clergy, and frankly, I've forgotten the fourth, but very limited number. The book seems to have envisions, first of all, currently maybe unlimited number, as long as you can participate in this grand bargain and get the state to regulate you or to authorize whatever it is you do. But the state these days seems to be regulating everybody. I went to get my hair cut the other day, and the person cutting my hair said, I'm a professional. And I said, well, I didn't want to be rude, but why are you a professional? He said, well, the state gives me the certificate. The idea, the modern idea of profession, I take it differs from the early designation of these four occupations as professions.
There are no
are the boundary lines clear?
In the British government at one stage did a study where I think they suggested there were several hundred categories of professions. One of the key characteristics seems to be, and we talk about this at length, and this is why management consultants often say they're not consultants, is this idea of exclusivity. It's not just that you're permitted, but others are prohibited from being involved in certain activities. A lot of people use the term profession, of course, to add some kind of credibility or weight or gravitas to their activities. It seems like a positive thing to say, in the same way that people say it's a very professional job. A job done by a tradesperson, you might say, is professional. I'm not sure how much hangs on these issues. What we did, we looked at 8 in particular. We looked at health and medicine. We looked at architecture, law, accounting. We looked at audit and tax. We looked at consulting. We also looked at journalism, and some people said, well, that's not a profession, and we explained why we chose it. And we did indeed look at the clergy as well. In some ways, I suppose the argument of the book is that the whole concept of professional service will fade over time. And we argue that much as the trades of the Middle Ages, the tallow chandlers, the cordwainers, the wheelwrights, people who were involved with candles, with leather goods, with making of wheels, and these trades no longer existed because other mechanisms for the development of delivery of their products and services were developed. We don't think it daft to imagine in, say, 100 years' time that you might similarly, people might look back and say, who were these people, solicitors, as we call them in England and Wales? And we will, I think, see a fading away, and this is the conclusion we find hard to avoid in the need for fresh and blood for professionals as they practice today.
So let me, first of all, show off your new book. I don't know if
Well, thank you.
Nice graphic at the beginning, but there is, of course, 2 parts to the book: the original part and the added part. I'd like to just quote from the very last paragraph of the new part. A running and related theme of this book is that we do not believe that the most important questions about the future are about, say, the future of doctors, lawyers, or teachers. Instead, our preoccupation is with health, justice, and learning, and how technology can radically promote better access to each. And then at the beginning of the original edition, you say that your goal is to, which I have right here, our focus is on doctors, lawyers, teachers, accountants, tax advisors, management consultants, architects, journalists, clergy, among others. So I think you had a challenge in how you framed what the substance of the book was going to be.
Yeah.
Whether it's
so in the original book, it is indeed true. We started off then. Towards the end, we say we actually have realized we're asking the wrong question. And of course, our starting point was the professions themselves. But where we end up is thinking there are far more important questions than the future of these individual professions. In the preface to the new edition, in the new one, I tell the story of being invited to speak to 2,000 neurosurgeons about the book in 2017, and it was a sort of forbidding audience, and they asked me to be controversial. And my opening line was, I said, patients don't want neurosurgeons, and there was a gasp in the audience. I said, patients want health. And for a particular type of health problem, I said, you're the best answer we have today. But I said, do you not think people will look back in the future and think, it's unbelievable we used to cut bodies open, how primitive? Because the future of healthcare, I argued that day, was not better surgery, or I think that we're expecting from me robotic surgery, although there will be some of that. The future is non-invasive therapy and preventative medicine. And that led me to think, and this is part of both the end of the first edition and of the beginning of the new one, that asking a question like, what's the future of neurosurgery, or what's the future of X, where X is a profession, is asking the wrong question, because you're almost encouraging people to address X. What you should be asking is, how in the future will we be solving the problems to which neurosurgeons are currently our best answer? How in the future will we be solving the problems to which lawyers, accountants, and others are currently our best answer? That doesn't require you to say that in the future we'll be using lawyers and doctors. So you've picked out what it looks like an anomaly, but in fact it's the running theme. We started off making the error that everyone else does, asking, in fact the errors in the title, The Future of the Professions, where, and I accept this will be a less snappy title, it should be how in the future we'll be solving the problems to which the professions are currently the best answer. Now, that of course would not be a snappy title, but this is the fundamental point. And I say it to judges in our community, we're talking about online dispute resolution, and say, you're asking the wrong question if you're saying, what's the future of judges? The question is, how in the future will we solve problems to which judges currently are our best answer? And many of us in this virtual room today will say, through online dispute resolution techniques. So it's not a playing with words. There's another aspect to this, as many people read the book and say it's very pessimistic. And I say it's remarkable you say that. You might be pessimistic if you're a lawyer, doctor, or accountant, but if you're the recipient of professional service, here what we're suggesting is a way that we can make content, advice, documents, materials far more widely available, far more easily accessible. Because our fundamental argument is this, that we're living in an era of increasingly capable machines. That's our key phrase, increasingly capable systems. It's kind of enabling technology agnostic, that phrase, but our systems are getting increasingly capable. Hardly a day passes that we don't hear news of some kind of new technology or system or app or breakthrough. And what's fascinating is that often these breakthroughs are about systems that can do things that historically we thought could only be undertaken by human beings. And the more we looked at this, the more we thought actually many of the tasks that engage human professionals will over time be undertaken by machines. And for us, this gives rise, as I said earlier, to different ways of making practical expertise more widely available and more easily accessible. So we begin to see the glimpse of a global health system where health knowledge and expertise is available to anyone who's got access to a mobile phone, online dispute resolution. Likewise, online education, similarly. Yes, if you are a traditional one-to-one provider of traditional service, I can see this as threatening. But if your perspective, and this is why we say it, is justice, health, and education, rather than lawyers, doctors, and teachers, that's why we say the future, it's an optimistic future we lay out rather than a threatening one.
Yeah, I once wrote a book, and the reviewers, part of the review was on how optimistic the book was. And I thought to myself, I was just not writing optimism or pessimism. I was just writing what I thought was happening. But 20 years later, 20 years after that, I realized, yeah, I was being optimistic. What happened 20 years later was not really on my radar, or at least I was hoping it wasn't on my radar. But as with our experience a few minutes ago, technology is generating disputes that we just have trouble in anticipating.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there are more of them. So do we need people to resolve those disputes, or do we need, for any kind of those disputes, do we need professionals of some kind who have been mandated by the state to have control over certain categories of problems?
My main interest, as you know, in dispute resolution, as many of you share this interest, is less about resolution and more about avoidance and containment. And so one of my phrases I use is that most people prefer a fence at the top of the cliff to an ambulance at the bottom. And a lot of improvements to dispute resolution services over the years have been getting the ambulance to the scene of the problem that bit quicker and equipping it that bit better. What interests me is the combination of human beings and systems and processes that we can put at the top of the cliff. But I don't regard them, quite involved with this in England and Wales just now, when we're thinking of the phrase I use is putting a front end onto our court system, which can hopefully dissolve some disputes and make sure that only a fraction really go through to the court system of last resort rather. What's very interesting is what kind of people will be involved in that front end, and they're not the traditional professionals. They're not necessarily the traditional judges and lawyers. I think they'll be hybrids, and I write about this in my book on online courts as well. And so I think we should be open to the idea of categorizing new people as professionals. I often put up a list for lawyers and judges that includes people like legal knowledge engineers, legal process analysts, legal risk managers, legal systems designers. And I say, who are they? And people look rather blankly. And I say, these are the people who will be developing the systems which will be solving the problems to which lawyers and judges today are our only solution. And that's why I call them tomorrow's lawyers. And that's why I've written a book on that subject. But it's because I don't really want to define a lawyer by reference to law school or their training or background. I want to define a lawyer by reference to the kinds of problems that they solve and the value that they bring. And what fascinates me and Dan when we wrote this book is we can anticipate different kinds of individuals bringing the benefits, bringing the value that historically we only thought could be delivered by flesh and blood professionals.
And what's changed over the last, or not the last 2 years, but the 2-year period between writing the first edition and dreaming up the second edition?
Well, the first edition came out in 2015, so in fact was completed in 2014, and this edition was completed last year. So it's actually 7 years on. It's just amazing, I find, between editions of book how quickly time passes. But we had meant to write this book in 2019, and we're pretty much, as we say this in the preface, we're pretty much finished it when COVID came along in early 2020. So one of the, I do want to just say something about this. One of the changes was COVID itself, and the common observation that's made about technology generally and specifically in the professions and even more specifically in law is that COVID has accelerated the uptake of technology. So we have quite a long discussion about this in the new edition of the book, and our conclusion is slightly different. It rests, first of all, on the distinction that we draw in the first edition of the book between automation and innovation. Automation being the computerization of things you already do, systematizing, streamlining, and optimizing our current and past ways of working. And innovation, in our terms at least, is using technology to allow you to do things that previously weren't possible. And I give you that preliminary definition because our view is COVID accelerated automation, but decelerated innovation. So what we saw during the COVID period was the massive rollout and adoption of a very limited number of technologies, essentially technologies for home working. And in the courts, we saw them largely video hearings. If you look at the remote courts worldwide, the site we set up over here to try and monitor the move from physical courts to remote courts, now 169 countries around the world have used remote courts, largely video hearings, during the last couple of years, which I think for all of us was unimaginable at the beginning of 2020. But I don't think dropping a hearing into Zoom is a shift in paradigm. It's the same people, it's the same processes, same problems actually. And what we essentially asked, and I was involved with this in England and Wales, and I'm sure you were involved in your own jurisdictions, we asked the question in March 2020, how can we use technology to keep the current system afloat? We didn't ask how can we use technology fundamentally to change the business model or shift the paradigm. We weren't saying how can we use artificial intelligence and blockchain to replace our old court system. We were using technology in the traditional automation. We said, how can we use technology to deliver the court service without assembling physically? All the other, by and large, the more transformational technologies like AI and blockchain, machine learning and so forth, in most professional firms and in most courtrooms around the world, all of that was put on back burners. That's why we said they've seen a deceleration of interest in the more exotic technologies, but an acceleration in a fairly limited range of nonetheless vital technologies. So what we do in the book is we put out in also in March 2020, this chart that we said how 5 phases that we thought we would go through in COVID, a mobilization phase, a lockdown phase, an emergence phase, a surgeons phase, and an equilibrium phase. These 5 phases that we predicted, and there was a little loop within that we would go through societally as we grappled with and eventually emerged from the COVID crisis. And then we mapped the technology on top of that. And as I say, the conclusion is that although we're not actually in our view, the final phase yet, our conclusion is an acceleration of automation, a deceleration of innovation. Nonetheless, and we say this pretty clearly, I think it's probably page 1 of the new book, that we don't believe that COVID changes the overall trajectory of the fundamental message of the book, which is that our machines are becoming increasingly capable, they're taking on more and more tasks, and over time, it's hard to imagine that the professions won't be radically changed by this. So that remains the same. What we have done, though, in the intervening period is we had the opportunity to visit hundreds of professional firms around the world. We've presented to tens of thousands of people. And what's been fascinating is to find the reaction to the book. And it's fairly polarized. Some people say it's all self-evident. Of course, technology will have a huge impact. And others say you don't understand. Professional work is far more than just the processing of knowledge. There's empathy, there's interpersonal contact, there's deeper meaning involved. And what you're suggesting is therefore dangerous. And people tend to sit at one end of the spectrum rather than the other. A little like AI, people respond quite similarly. But what we did look at, and we looked at it quite at some length when we went into professional firms, and we report back on this in the book, is when people are claiming in professional firms to be innovative, we wanted to do a little bit of digging and see, well, what does that actually mean? Everyone's claiming it, and there's a veritable industry of awards around the world where people are picking up awards for being the most innovative law firm, the most innovative director of innovation, the most innovative director of transformation. They're endless. And so what we thought would be quite helpful is just actually to have a look at what's really going on. And I hope it doesn't sound cynical, but it's meant to be analytical. What we conclude is that, in fact, what we've seen over the last 5 years, we don't think this contradicts our thesis, but what we're seeing just now is mainly what we call first generation rather than second generation innovation. So first generation innovation, just to give a taste of what this is about, is far more about process improvement rather than radical change or new business models. So people talk about transformation, And as we say in the book, all transformation projects seem to end up as efficiency projects. So everyone starts off with great transformational ambitions, but once they get into the project, what we find is most innovation in most professional firms is actually about process improvement and efficiency gains. There's a lot of marketing noise, far more than marketing noise than operational systems. When you go into, say, a professional firm, you'll find those that claim to be innovative usually have a handful of partners who are supportive, not the whole partnership. You find that the focus tends to be on short-term tactical stuff rather than long-term strategic change through innovation. You find in the first generation very little revenue being generated, whereas in the second generation we anticipate considerable revenue being generated. People in the first generation firms intellectually get the changes we, and I suspect many people in this room, talk about, these intellectual changes, but actually they don't feel it emotionally. They don't really believe in their heart that within their time as professional workers, there's going to be fundamental change. So what we say is we're very much still the foothills of the journey here, that the so-called innovative professional firms are more about, as I say, process improvement than radical change. And essentially, we're providing a 10-point checklist for professional firms to see which they, in all honesty, look at yourselves and say, tick the boxes. And we have not, one of our conclusions is we have not in our travels found a big professional firm that's self-disrupted. And the reasons for this are pretty evident, that professional service firms are actually at a golden period over the last 5 or 10 years. I often joke when I speak to partnerships, it's hard to convince a room full of millionaires that they've got their business model wrong, but that the reality is they are tremendously successful, and none of them is rushing. And I mean, literally, no single professional firm of substance is rushing to self-disrupt. They don't think like Apple or Samsung or pharmaceutical companies. They tend to think over the next 1 or 2 years rather than the next 5 or 10 years. But as I say, none of this, we believe, affects the overall trajectory, which is this impact of increasingly capable systems. And frankly, whether or not that's 2027, 28, 34, it's not really part of our book. Our book is, it's not like a lot of the more practical things I've written, like my book, Tomorrow's Lawyers, where I'm really trying to chart out people's careers and help them over the next few years. We're trying to do something slightly bigger picture here and see the contours of what we call professional work today, see how that's going to shift in years to come. So there's a couple of changes, a couple of big bits with big analysis of the actual input of impact of innovation and a big analysis of COVID. There's lots more besides. We actually do an update also across each profession about what kinds of changes we're seeing. And this, of course, just to add one thing, this, of course, is moving beneath our feet just now. It was about 2 weeks ago, Ernst & Young were reported to have said that they're planning to split off audit from advisory, and it's not clear whether or not they will or what they've actually said. They certainly, I think they've acknowledged the discussions are going on. And I wrote an article in the Times, I think it was last week or perhaps the week before, about this, because if indeed the big four followed and audit was split off from the rest of these firms, then this would free the major firms to acquire, the major accounting firms to acquire major law firms, which they've never been able to do because of audit conflicts. And that would be the biggest single seismic shift in commercial law for decades. May or may not happen, but I say that just even over the last couple of weeks, we're seeing potential changes that could have great impact. And another great uncertainty, of course, in the United States is liberalization, the extent to which, and we're beginning to see it happening in some states, non-lawyers can own and run legal practices. All of that, I think both liberalization and the split up of audit is likely to happen in 2020s. So if you look at our profession, and looking at most of you here, we're mainly lawyers and people interested in courts, I think we'll see dramatic change for these reasons alone.
We have 28 either questions or comments in the chat. You want to give us one or two?
Sure. So Orna says, thanks so much, inspiring and fascinating. I wonder to what extent this future can be seen as liberating for professionals as well, given the research on lawyer and doctor unhappiness, depression, etc.
Thanks, Orna. I'm one of Orna's biggest fans as well, so it's great to see you online. That is an optimistic view. I think, as a matter of fact, you might be right that people, once make the leap, as it were, away from traditional service, they may find it empowering. But just now, a lot of professionals who read my stuff hope they can hold out to retirement before this engulfs them, to be honest. And the way I phrase it now to try and make the future a little clearer, and I know this is crude, but I say that the basic career choice every lawyer has is the same as the strategic choice your business has, which is, should you compete with the systems that are being developed and emerging, or should you build them? By competing them, you're saying something like, I hear what Richard and Dan say about all these changes, but they don't really understand the work we do. And we think lots of the work we do can never be done by a machine. And even if it is done by a machine, we think we can do it better. So that's saying our business and my career is going to focus on competing with these increasingly capable systems. But the alternative, as we point out, is to be involved in building the systems that replace our old ways of working. And we say that that's a privilege. We say that's exciting. And particularly for young lawyers, to be able to come in, or young professionals, to be able to join a profession and not simply take the baton from the person the year ahead and do what they're doing, but actually play an active role in essentially replacing some of our old, arcane, outmoded ways of working. That's a privilege. That's great fun. I do appreciate, though, for many mainstream professionals who've maybe invested 10 or 15 years in their craft as they would perceive it, this is dangerous and threatening stuff. What I would also say, though, is you're not alone. When I say this to lawyers, I often say that it's exactly the same in medicine and in audit and architecture. And we are just going through, the white collar workers are going through the kind of change that blue collar workers and manual laborers have seen in decades and centuries gone by. It's the evolution, I think, of humans and society.
Well, fascinating. Anybody else?
Yeah, we have a little conversation going on that both Jim and Meyer have engaged with. They're raising questions about how you see AI being incorporated, whether, for example, it will happen more readily in the civil realm rather than criminal, or whether it will happen in the criminal realm as well, and whether you think that AI is merely going to be offering more options, or actually being a decision maker in court-related matters.
So what we say in the book about this is just to draw the distinction between what's technically possible and what's ethically desirable. And I see in civil and criminal law great technical possibilities, but I see that we may choose in society to draw our ethical red lines in different places. And as a generality, as someone who's advising courts and judges and lawyers around the world, I think people are less nervous about fundamental transformation to civil process than they are to criminal process. And so we might end up in a situation where many of the grave challenges faces the criminal process could in fact be overcome by technology, but for a variety of reasons. For example, people feel that there must be a jury in person in a physical room, or that a victim should be able to have his or her day in court, and so forth. There might be a common set of perceptions which we may or may not share, but might be widely shared by others, which will inhibit our use of technology in the criminal area. So for me, it's not the question of the use of technology in criminal and civil is less about technical feasibility and more about what we consider to be ethically desirable. We have, I can't speak for jurisdictions represented here other than in England and Wales, but we have had an increase of our cases in our Crown Court from the waiting list from something like 30,000 to 60,000 during the COVID period. And that means, and that's the most serious of crimes. So it actually means many people are being held and their cases may not be heard for a couple of years. So the point of view of the victims and the accused, this is very, very problematic. And I and others can think of a number of technological solutions that could actually help tackle the backlog, but I'm not sure our legislature, I'm not sure our society is ready for these yet.
So, Richard, Andrew has a rather extensive question, but it relates directly to ethics, but kind of a different bent on that. So I'll read this out for you.
Sure.
I'm interested in the role of professional ethics in your vision of the future of professions. Professional ethics, whether it's doctors, lawyers, engineers, are not always effective either to provide guidance, to address thorny problems, or to discipline bad behavior. But the existence of codes within bodies to maintain or enforce them seems like an important element of the professions. I think your work on the future of work done by professions is powerful and provocative. And I'd like to know whether your thinking speaks specifically to the future of professional ethics. Thanks.
Yes, it does. We don't deny it's a bit like empathy. We don't deny the importance of empathy, nor the importance of professional ethics, but one has to see the systems of professional ethics we have in the context of the way in which practical expertise is produced and distributed in the traditional professions, which is through human beings in a one-to-one consultative advisory way. Now, many people will say to me, what a client wants is a trusted advisor. That's a very common observation, a trusted advisor who is bound by an ethical code. And my response to that is actually, it's the same as my response to people who don't want neurosurgeons, they want health. It's a remarkably provider-oriented view to talk in your first and opening sentences. This is not an observation about the question, it's just an observation about the debate. If your starting point is the human advisor, yes, of course, the whole edifice of ethics and empathy naturally come with it. But if you start from a different point of view, which is commoditization, productization, industrialization of solutions, it's not that professional ethics are important, it's in a sense they're irrelevant. It was a bit like during COVID, there was a period during which when I was listening to doctors and they were responding to the crisis and they're saying what people, and because this was in the context of doctors seeing people online and doctors saying what you really need is a trusted advisor face to face. And I was actually thinking at the time, what I really want is a jab in my arm. It wasn't because if you think of what the vaccines were, on one level, they are the distillation, the commoditization, the industrialization of massive amounts of medical science expertise delivered as a product. And what most of us wanted, almost all of us wanted, rather than a consultation with a doctor, an empathetic doctor with code governed by ethical codes, we wanted this proven, trustworthy product. And that's what leads us in the book to say we need to move away, I think, or we say, from thinking that the only way to ensure high quality is through trusted advisors bound by ethical codes, is to have a new concept of the trustworthy. So we have this detailed discussion about duties of good faith and so forth, which are fundamental to most ethical codes. The utmost duty of good faith, that you put your client ahead of yourself and so forth. And we actually think in some respects that's a standard too high. And what people are wanting is trustworthy, reliable outcomes, which is a different way of looking at it rather than saying what I want is a trusted professional advisor. And in all of this, I think we confuse how it is we deliver the outcome today with the outcome itself. And as professionals, we're preoccupied as much with the method as we are with the outcome. That's why we talk about wigs, we talk about gowns, we talk about methods and so forth. And so we hang on to a lot of tradition And our fundamental challenge is to say, to what extent is how we work today intrinsically significant, important, as distinct from the outcomes we deliver? And can we envisage delivering these outcomes in different ways? So we can envisage delivering the outcomes people want without the professional advisor bound by ethics. It doesn't mean it's some kind of anarchy, and this is a codeless abyss with no moral guidance. It just means we shift the emphasis.
So Michael asks, how is the metaverse, how is it going to transform the work of human experts?
The metaverse is, I suspect, fascinating all of us, not least the question, what is it? Some people seem to be talking about immersive virtual reality. Others seem to talk about metaverse as any form of online interaction that's not a physical interaction. And there's all sorts of things in between about augmented reality and so forth. If you forgive the pun, the reality is, I suspect we'll become, and another pun, we'll become more and more immersed in online experience. And I was struck, and I'll tell a little story because it did affect my perception of all of this. Not long ago, I was at an exhibition, and it was an exhibition. There was a demonstration of haptics. It's to do with the technology that helps you feel. Anyway, they put on a head-mounted display and put two little stick things in the end of my fingers. So they put on the head-mounted display, and I look around, and all I can see is a room and a table and a bowl. And in the bowl, there is a tennis ball and a billiard ball. And I can see nothing else, and you are completely immersed. And the person running the experiment said to me, pick up the billiard ball. And I said, what do you mean? He said, don't think about it, just pick up the billiard ball. We've put something in your fingers that will help you do it. But basically, I moved my hand. I could see what looked like my hand in before me. I put my fingers around the billiard ball in terms of its density and its touch, and just the feeling, and this was the haptics. It felt like a billiard ball. He said, lift it up. I lifted it up. It had the weight, the feel of a billiard ball. He said, put it down. I put it down. He said, do the same with the tennis ball. And the tennis ball, a little bit of give in the surface, could squeeze a little, picked it up. It was lighter. I cannot tell you for that at that time how immersed I felt. And of course, any of you view games, you'll have that same kind of experience. But it was just a glimpse that it seems to me entirely feasible before long. We will live extended amounts of our time in an immersive online environment. And the fascinating question there for lawyers about what kinds of rules and code and laws apply in this area, who owns and controls it, and from our point of view in our community, might this be an interesting environment in which to conduct the resolution of disputes? Why might that be advantageous? But insofar as the metaverse is a significant new extension of the human experience, then it seems to me it's going to be fundamental to professionals. There'll be issues about mental health within the metaverse. There'll be financial issues for accountants and auditors in the metaverse. It'll be another form of community that gives rise to, let's go back to the first principles, people won't have sufficient knowledge to know all aspects of how to conduct themselves within the metaverse, and therefore professional work, and this is why professional firms around the world are now speaking about the metaverse. So it's we're at the foothills. It's tremendously early days. What fascinates me is the coming together of AI and metaverse, the AI systems generating entirely new worlds of ever greater sophistication. I do think this is where, if you take a technology such as blockchain, about which a huge amounts have said, and of course it's significant. I don't have the same feeling about blockchain that I do have about virtual reality. I do think virtual reality will have a far more profound effect on the human experience than blockchain. So I think we are at the brink, very early days, the brink of something very significant. And each profession should be thinking, forgive me, what it means for them.
So
I think we have time for one or two more, Leah. No?
Great. Sure. So Graham asks, is there a bigger future for the professional, where the acronym refers not so much to artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence, which the latter augments the skill of the professional and simply does not work without the assistance of an experienced professional? And if I could tag on a piece of my own question to what Graham's raising, you early on today mentioned that technology has made it possible for people who are not in what some people consider a mainstream profession, at least in some cultures. So we have non-allopathic health care professionals or others in some of the under-regulated professions. So would the use of AI as augmented intelligence actually provide more opportunity for those who are seen as outside of some traditional professions, or is it going to allow for and require the assistance of quote unquote experienced professionals?
There's all sorts of different things going on there in these questions, and they're really important. I think underpinning often that kind of question is the feeling that, well, let me tell a story from the book. One of our probably our all-time favorite system in the book is an app called Confession, and it's for people who follow the Catholic Church, and it offers tools for them to track their own sin, and often offers drop-down menus that offer options for contrition. And so controversial was this app that the Vatican itself had to be involved in 2011 or 12, I think, in deciding whether or not this was a good thing. And the Vatican came back and said, this is summarizes, I think, a position very nicely. It says that this is a terribly useful tool in preparation for confession, but not a substitute for the real thing. And that, to some extent, reflects, I think, many people's views on AI, that it's not a substitute for the real thing. It's very good in preparation. It's very good in support. And you will see the standard mantra right across professional firms in their publicity when they're talking about AI. This, of course, will not replace professionals. It will enable professionals to do a higher quality of work. We challenge that, because we say, if you believe in the thesis of increasingly capable machines, then over time, even if human beings and machines collaborate, the relative contribution that human beings will offer will necessarily reduce. That seems to me to be inherent in the thesis of increasingly capable machines. Now, it may well be that there is a kind of residue left that only human beings can be involved with, but we've not yet seen evidence of what that would look like. And so we view the conception of AI as a tool to support professionals as a temporary phenomenon, because over time, many of the contributions that the human being would make to the partnership would actually be taken on by the machine, at least in principle. And we discussed that at some length. I think you were making a slightly different point, though. And this is a point we discuss in relation to medicine, that we can see, for example, primary care in the future will be delivered by, primary healthcare will be delivered by, for example, practitioner nurses using AI diagnostic tools. So the diagnostic tools will outperform the traditional doctors, and we've seen evidence of this already, most notably the Stanford system on melanoma. But even if you look at the stuff that goes on with DeepMind and so forth, I think it's entirely conceivable in a wide range of diagnostics that these machines will outperform human beings. But that doesn't mean you don't want someone there, and this is the empathy point, to discuss the impact, to break the news, to chat through the next steps and so forth. But that might not necessarily be, it's unlikely to be the traditional doctor. The traditional doctor was the knowledge processor. The knowledge processing is now being done by the machine. Indeed, many traditional doctors, not by no means all, but many traditional doctors are criticized for not having the bedside manner. And the typical surgeon may say that that's not what I'm there for, I'm there to solve the problem. But we can see an inversion whereby we have a whole new range of paraprofessionals, is the generic term we put it, who are actually fantastic interpersonally, and they have a wide range of diagnostic AI tools to support them, whether or not that be in law or medicine or wherever. So we see that as quite in fact, it's one of the 6 alternative business models we see for the delivery of professional expertise in the medium term.
Okay, Liam, we'll wrap up.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Richard. I'll leave it to Ethan to close, but thank you very much.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely grateful to you as usual for helping us. And I think this was a very substantive conversation, and always interested to look into the future, and then in the future take a look at what's been happening. I think you mentioned your 10-point test or evaluative scale on what's transformative. And I think I'll get some people to fill it out from the ODR point of view and see if we're transformative or just maybe efficient. But thanks very much. And thanks to all of you for stopping by wherever you are.
Yes, thanks for everyone for joining.
And thank you, Leah, most of all.
Thanks, everyone, for spending some time with us. And thank you, Richard, so much, and Ethan.